Warning: this fanfiction contains blood, gore, and murder. Materials in this fanfiction might be disturbing for a younger audience. Viewer discretion advised. You have been warned.
Tabitha was my best friend. She had long dark braids that went past her shoulders and naturally almond-colored skin that I could only match in the summer, and that was from running around with her for hours on end. She was funny, pretty, and had great taste in music. Her taste in guys was questionable. No way, I declared in between mouthfuls of Domino's pizza. Jordan is totally hotter than Donnie. Jordan sings like a girl Karen. Besides, Donnie rides a motorcycle and that counts on the hotness scale. Oh please, I groaned and pushed up my glasses. Look, can we just agree that Danny is the least cute? Well duh, she said, giggling. So, where's your family? I thought we'd have to chase off Billy and your little sister. Billy's at football camp and Carrie's staying at one of her little mutant buddies for the night. Nice. Tabitha cocked her head. What about your folks? I mean, where? Dinner and a concert. Frank something or other. Fogey music. They'll be back late. Wicked, exclaimed Tabitha. Oh wow. We can do pretty much anything we want. Good thing too, I said and looked away. I mean, because, you know. Yeah. 3 weeks ago we'd found out that Tabitha's dad had gotten a promotion. While it meant more money, it also meant that they were going to be moving across the country. By the time Wednesday came, my best friend, who'd also lived next door to me since I was 5, would be gone, and a house that I'd spent so much time in would be nothing more than a place I used to be able to go to. The night Tabitha told me, I'd cried for hours and she'd cried along with me. At 11 and 12 years old respectively, we thought we'd be together forever. Even after we'd married our preferred member of New Kids on the Block, we'd live in a giant mansion. That news made it unlikely that it would ever happen, and any mention of it was an immediate bummer. Hey, said Tabitha as she leaned to me, you know you can visit, right? Yeah, if Mom will let me. Well, my parents said it would be okay, so yours will have to say yes. Plus tomorrow we've got the air show and all. Yeah. Not really into planes, but it's something. Let's do something tonight then. I leaned back into the couch and closed my eyes and ran through all of the stuff we could do. After a few ideas flew by, I got up and went over to the cabinet where we kept the VHS tapes. Tabitha asked what I was looking for, but before long I emerged with a copy of The Lost Boys. Tabitha's eyes widened and her mouth dropped. We're not supposed to watch that. That's a scary movie, and an R-rated one at that. I smirked. Hey, my house, my rules. Besides, if this is our last sleepover for a while, let's make it one we'll remember. But we'll get in trouble. Like hell we will. If you don't tell, I won't. Simple as that, I said and popped in the tape. The opening credits began and I plopped myself next to Tabitha. She glanced over at me and then back at the screen as the camera slowly flew over the fairground and Cry Little Sister blared. I smiled back at her, a contented yet sad smile. No matter what we'd told one another, we knew that our lives were going in different directions and that our friendship wouldn't survive the thousands of miles between here and there. She'd find new friends and I'd be left with an empty house next door. It was only a matter of time. Suddenly, the movie cut out. I glanced back at the screen and saw that the movie had been replaced with some weird cartoon with happy, singing and dancing ponies. What the shit, I grumbled. Did you sit on the remote or something, Tab? I glanced back at my friend who sat stock still, her eyes glued to the screen. I shook her once, twice, but she didn't move as the hypnotic song slowly filled the room. Slowly I turned my head back to the television as I felt around for the remote. Yet, the more I watched, the less I reached for it. After a minute or two, unable to turn away from the show, I noticed a strange smell slowly drifting through the room. It was musty yet sweet, sort of like Grandma's house in the spring. Slowly, but surely, whatever feelings of worry or fear that I'd had about losing my friend melted away, and a sensation of safety and love wrapped about me. It was then the ponies broke into yet another song. Yet, as they sang, I could hear someone else whispering under the song's lyrics. A true friend helps a friend in need. I am the one who watches you always. A friend in need to help them see. I am cold and always hungry. A true friend helps a friend in need. Will you be my friend? To see the light that shines from a true friend. Will you make the cold go away? The world began to spin and the warm familiar smell that once filled the room was suddenly replaced with something stronger. The thick smell of something burning made me feel dizzy and a new sensation of intense heat began to fill me. I tried to say something but couldn't as a low whine began to fill the air. The world shuddered and what was my living room now felt foreign and hostile. It was as if the world I'd always known had cracked open and hell had slowly seeped out from behind its thin walls. My mind filled with strange visions of strangers running in fear and confusion. I could feel myself being knocked to the ground and yet I hadn't moved an inch. The world shook and dimmed as screams echoed in my ears, my own voice added to them as a large fiery metal object tumbled toward me and made me feel sick before the world finally went black and there was nothing. I fought the nothing. I kicked but couldn't feel my legs. I screamed but couldn't hear my voice. Yet, fight as I did, the darkness wrapped about me and I felt a pain that wasn't physical but much deeper. Suddenly, colorful images and pretty worlds flashed just beyond my reach at the end of a long hall. They tempted me with things I didn't understand but assured me that's what I wanted and needed. It pulled me toward it harder and demanded that I accept whatever it was offering. The overload was almost too great for me to handle and before long I could feel my body again. I felt it shake and I started to gasp. My heart pounded in my chest as bile rose in my throat as I started to feel myself beginning to pass out. Slowly the pretty world at the end of the hall faded to black. Yet as it faded I swore I saw the silhouette of a cart being pulled by some small creature with a long pointed hat. My stomach told me that it was something I never wanted to see again and I shut my eyes just as the last bits of light were gone and something solid rested under me. When I opened my eyes I found myself lying on a dirty wooden floor that was almost empty except for me, an old busted TV set that was covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. I don't know how long I'd been there but it had to have been for a while judging from the long shadows cast by the setting sun through the filthy windows. Where the hell? I muttered to myself as I glanced about the room in confusion. I examined my new surroundings in the fading light as uneasiness wrapped around me. The uncomfortable familiarity along with a growing pain of sadness that I couldn't comprehend held me tight. Beyond the broken television, the dust and cobwebs, there was something I just couldn't put my finger on. Then it suddenly hit me, I was in Tabitha's old room. But how did I get here and why was it so old and dirty, I wondered. I was so busy examining the room I didn't notice there was someone else was with me until I heard the gasp. "What are you still doing here?" asked a surprised voice from behind me, "and how did you get inside?" I turned and found myself face to face with someone I have never seen before. The girl was pale with a strange bluish tint to her skin. She had white hair that hung straight down and ended in a curl at the end. She also wore this strange navy blue dress that was covered in sequins of stars that glittered even in this poor lighting. I also noticed the dress was too long for her and went past her feet. "Can you talk?" the girl asked as she gathered her courage, "or are you just going to stand there like you always do?" I gazed at the young girl, mouth wide open as she questioned me. She looked like she my age but at the same time seemed older than anyone I have known. I stepped back from the girl as I stared into her large purple eyes. "How did you get into Tabitha's house?" I asked as a tremor of fear and anger ran through my voice. "Nobody lives here anymore." "Well, if that's the case I could ask you the same question. However, I came because I was called," she said, continuing to stare at me with her large unblinking eyes as if there was something wrong with me. As if I was somehow dangerous. "I have never been called by someone like you before. Although I have to admit I'm pretty curious as to why." I opened my eyes. Once again I was in Tabitha's room. The feelings of sadness and confusion slowly wrapped about me as my eyes darted about the small space. The question of why I was here when I was just at a sleepover with Tabitha not a few minutes ago was strange. Yet as I glanced around the room I noticed that something had changed. Someone had drawn stick figures of ponies on the walls in crayon. The ponies were happy and were surrounded by dancing children who seemed to be singing happily with them. Some of the pictures even had the ponies arm in arm with them as they skipped along across the walls of the room. Yet, as cheerful as the drawings were, something about them made me uneasy. I continued to look about the room toward the closet where, under a small towel, rested a blue toy unicorn. It was faded and a little dirty, yet it had a tall purple hat and cape. It had been loved by someone even if the eyes were darkened out. I guess they had a brother too who liked to take things and mess them up. Quietly I picked up the pony and held it. My hand ran across its hat and mane, and for some reason it made me feel better. It made me feel protected, almost as if it were a friend. As I held the pony, I saw another drawing of the same pony and a small child smiling while watching fireworks. Underneath the picture were the words, "Trixie and me watch the show." Single quote. Next to that picture was another picture of a small girl. It looked like an autumn picture with the red and yellow leaves surrounding her and the large tree above her. For some reason, unlike the other pictures, the girl was sad, and looking at it made me feel the same way. I shook my head and carried the toy downstairs with me, where I saw the strange girl sitting at a small table with a tea set in front of her. "Oh, there you are," said the strange girl, "I see you're back. I was worried you wouldn't come back after we last spoke. You were pretty upset." "Trixie," I muttered to myself. "Yes. Your name is Trixie, isn't it?" "Like the doll," I said, holding it up to emphasize it. "You still haven't told me why you're in Tabitha's old house." "Well, you're here too. We're partners in crime on this one, aren't we? If her dad finds out about this." Trixie smiled blankly at me. "I'm sure her father isn't going to care, and anyway, neither of us are going to tell him that we're someplace we aren't supposed to be, right? If you don't leave you could get arrested," I said to mask my own confusion. I couldn't explain the why or how I was here as well. Trixie smiled and poured 2 cups of tea, then grinned at me. Her mouth grew wider than I ever thought a person could, and caused me to take a step back. Her eyes locked with mine, and as I stared into them I felt like I could see an infinite realm of darkness behind them. Whatever she was, it wasn't part of this world. "I'm sorry I'm being rude. What is your name?" Trixie asked. "Karen," I squeaked. "That's a very nice name, Karen. Please won't you sit down? You do like tea, don't you?" "Not really. That's a shame. It's a pretty good blend. It can clear up any problems you might have. I find a good cup of tea can help clear your mind and set you on the right path," she said as she sipped hers, as a low swish of what looked like a tail darted out from under her dress, then back under it. "What are you?" I whispered. "I am nothing more than a simple traveling magician from a distant land. Periodically I try to help the people of the world." "Well, for a price, of course," she said as she glanced over at me. "Everything in this world requires something in exchange. Fortunately, people are always willing to pay for what I give them. Whether it's a fond memory, a lost memory, closure for those who seek it, or even on occasion something much more physical and substantial, I can provide it." "And what do you show them?" I asked, afraid of knowing the answer but wanting to hear it anyway. "Why, anything and everything," she said with a flourish. "I give them the truth, the only truth that is out there." She beckoned me to come closer, and I did so. She took hold of the hand that held the pony doll. She gazed at it and then me quietly for a moment. "Of course, if this is too much for you to handle, you can always call me by my other name and accept that as your answer." "What is your other name?" She smiled. "I know you're back," Trixie shouted as she ran up the stairs 2 at a time. "Why do you keep running?" "I'm only trying to help you. I'm your friend." I don't know how, but somehow I was in Tabitha's old closet, hiding behind a forgotten box full of rotting, mildewing cloths. I couldn't remember how I got there, but I was glad as I tried to keep myself as quiet as I could in the hope that Trixie wouldn't find me. "I can't help if you keep running," she shouted again, sounding much closer. "Please just let me in." I hadn't a clue what she was talking about as I scrunched myself deeper behind the box, trying my best to use it in the shadows to make myself invisible. When the old door to the room I was hiding in opened with a loud bang. Cautiously I peered over the box, getting a full whiff of the dank cloths, making want to vomit. Through a crack in the closet door I could see her standing there, angry and yet sad at the same time. "This is stupid," she said with a sigh. "You can't keep going on like this." I watched her as she aimlessly walked around the empty room. I sensed she knew exactly where I was but was biding her time. "I know you're scared. I can feel the fear pouring out of you. Heck, it's so thick I can taste it. We both are alike in more ways than you think," Trixie said, standing next to the dirty window, watching the sky darken. I watched her slowly hike up her dress off the ground, tearing the bottom half away from the top and letting it fall to the ground. "I know what it's like when denial is your state of existence," she said softly. "How sad it can be to travel that dark, lonesome road." Quickly I had to jam my hands over my mouth and bit down on my tongue to keep from screaming in horror as I saw the outline of her lower blue pony half illuminating with the final rays of daylight sinking over the horizon. It was ugly and terrible, like seeing two halves of different creatures meshed together to create something beyond any words I could use. "Would you like to see the real me?" she asked, turning awkwardly on her strange legs to face me. "Would you really like to see what is underneath everything? To know what happens after the end?" Horrified, I watched a small tickle of blood form from the angry red line of where the two halves met slowly trickle down her torso, going all the way past her blue hoof to form a small red dot on the dirty floor. She was a living nightmare and a thing that shouldn't be, standing here talking, in this house we both shouldn't be in. "So many have called to me wanting my help," Trixie said sadly, "the young, the old, the sick and the well, I have been there for them all. Doing everything I can to make their lives better. Why are you, of all the people I have been there for, are so afraid of me? Why are you so scared of the truth? She's lying." The inner voice in me cried out in denial. The part of me that wanted nothing she had to offer. The part of me that feared not what she was, rather what she offered. I stood frozen in terror as she calmly strode on her hooves that make clicking sounds across the dirty wooden floor to the closet I was hiding in. Standing next to the door, Trixie's outline was blending into the rushing darkness as the light finally vanished over the horizon. "I know what you're going to do," she said quietly. "Believe me, it's a mistake, and when you come back I'll be waiting for you. At some point I will show you the truth you keep running from." The door slowly opened with her standing there offering her hand to me as I recoiled. "You don't have to hide from me, Karen. I won't do anything to you, I promise. How can I trust, whatever you are?" Trixie paused and looked down. I know that I'm not what you expected. Maybe I haven't presented it to you in quite the right way, but maybe you can help me." "What do you mean?" "I'm a traveling magician. I want to perform a special show with you as my assistant, and then once it's done you can decide what to do. Sound fair?" I felt Trixie's cold hands wrap around mine as I stood in Tabitha's empty room once again. That repulsive sensation of emptiness radiated from her touch that dug deep into me, draining my will to struggle against her. I didn't want to know what she was talking about. I just wanted to be with Tabitha again, to watch movies, talk about boys, and do all the things we loved, that made me happy. "Don't be afraid," Trixie rasped, her breath enveloping my face with the familiar scent from back in my living room at the sleepover. It forced me to not breathe in order to prevent me from gagging. "You can't keep running from what you are. I'll be here for as long as you need me to be." Holding my hand, she escorted me out of the room, down the trash-filled steps and all the way to the front door. With a flick of her hand, the front door that was boarded up with dank wood and rusty nails, broke from its hinges, falling straight to the ground with a small cloud of dust rising upwards. With not a sound, Trixie walked me out of the house into the formless night ahead. It was a simple wooden stage that I found myself standing on, with Trixie still holding me tightly. A string of colored lights were twirled absently around the beam overhead, barely giving any light. With an old red curtain faded and worn hung behind me, with some cheap cardboard set cutouts of houses and trees absently set around the stage, seemingly forgotten. Everything beyond it was obliterated by the darkness, but I felt there were things beyond the stage lights that I couldn't and didn't want to see. Somewhere out there were thousands of eyes watching and waiting in perfect stillness for the show to begin. I let out a small exhale as a hidden stage light flared to life overhead to shine down on the center of the stage as another Trixie stepped up. She was the same yet different. Her human part was rotting away while I watched, while the pony part of her was now gray with chunks of flesh missing, showing putrid muscle and bone underneath the skin. Her dress and hat were tattered things barely holding on. She gave the hidden crowd a bright, wide smile that showed off broken, rotting teeth, some that were falling out even as talked. Trixie stretched her hand to include the entire audience as she began to address the hidden watchers with the gift of a natural showman. "Ladies and gentlemen, mares and stallions, children of all ages, tonight I, the great and powerful Trixie, has a very special performance for you," she said, working the unseen audience. "Tonight I have a show with grief and tears. A show with damnation, denial, lies and possibly salvation at the end. But first I want you to give it up for my assistant for tonight, the beautiful Karen." She finished and turned slightly around to show me off as another hidden stage light came on to illuminate me, still being held captive by the first Trixie. "This is your big moment to shine, my dear," whispered the original Trixie into my ear. "Knock 'em dead." She shoved me out from behind the curtain and I stumbled onto the stage, nearly falling off of it. Somehow the second Trixie managed to catch me and help me regain my balance and brought me to my feet. I shuddered with revulsion when I noticed that the hands that caught me were cold and rotting as she helped me up. Bits of her skin peeled off from our contact and the sound of unseen insects under her flesh made me gag. But still she had the strength to hold me tightly against her to prevent any thought of leaving. For tonight's special one-of-a-kind performance, the lovely Karen will attempt the death-defying, almost impossible trick imaginable. "I call it surviving the show," she said as the noise from the unseen crowd roared to a deafening sound of approval. "What?" I shouted. She pushed me further and further forward. Will she meet her end? Will she live to see another day? Only one way to find out. Without further ado and her fingers wrapped around me tightly, Trixie lifted me up and threw me off the stage. It was a bright, hot, sunny day. So hot that the sweat pouring from me had completely drenched the shirt I was wearing, almost ruining it. It was a brand new shirt my mom bought for me just to wear for my sleepover with Tabitha. I was saddened that this was going to be the last time we were going to be together. I kept smiling and telling her father and anyone else who would listen that I was happy that she was going to have so many new opportunities and see new sights. No. If last night was our night, then today was our day. We were going to make the most of it. At first I thought the show would be a bust, but as the planes darted around the sky doing their amazing acrobatics, I was hooked. I saw new ones, old ones, even the Blue Angles were there performing. The only thing I hated was the heat. Please don't. Even worse was the overpowering stink from the press of bodies as we stood jammed together in the terrible heat and watched the air show go on above us. As I looked over to my friend sitting on her father's shoulders, she and her dad were having just as much a hard time as me. The sun was baking them as well. I don't want this. We're going over to the concession stand to grab something to drink, said Tabitha turning towards me. Want me to get you a snow cone? Sure. But if they have them, a cherry limeade would be great, I almost begged. Already the dryness in my throat was making it hard to swallow. I watched the both of them push their way through the crowd and hoped against hope for something cool to come my way. I knew it would take a while for them to make it back due to the crowds and the fact that it was on the other side of airfield, so I went back to watching the show overhead, trying my best to deal with the heat and my thirst. Stop. The sun was now almost overhead and blinded me every time I tried to look up. Slowly the crowd began to shift, and as it did, it became more difficult to see anything. It sucked being a kid, sucked being shorter than a lot of the adults around me. Please stop it. Without warning, a loud explosion and heat rocked the crowd beyond my field of vision. The crowd screamed and began to move back and forth. A high-pitched whine grew ever louder as the crowd of people continued to shove each other and run in every direction to get away from whatever it was that was coming. I was pushed to the ground and stepped on a few times as the mindless panic took over the people. There was a crunch as an almost unbearable pain shot through my body as someone in their frenzy stepped on my leg. As I looked away, I saw my friend Tabitha still on her father's shoulder, pointing at me, screaming. I couldn't make out what she was saying. I reached out to her. The whine grew to an ear-splitting level as a break in the crowd finally gave me a view as to what everyone was freaking out over. A ball of fire and twisted metal somersaulted in the air, leaving a trail of black oily smoke behind it as it shot straight towards us, straight towards me. The world slowed as I saw it coming. There was no time for me to run or to scream. Despite the fire enveloping the plane, parts of the metal still caught the rays of the sun, transforming it to a thing that resembled a phoenix rising from the ashes. And I thought to myself that it was the most beautiful and terrifying thing I ever saw. I don't want to remember. You're dead, Karen. You've been dead for a long, long time, said Trixie. I sat on the filthy road curled into a ball, crying as the truth consumed me. It hurt a lot. When I looked around the neighborhood that used to be mine, it wasn't a place I recognized. What had once been green and vibrant now sat dull and empty. Weeds grew through the cracks in the street, and what few people still lived there hurried inside, away from whoever might be coming down the road. It had been forgotten, just like me. I was alone. I ran my hand down my leg, feeling the break for the first time. Stopping in horror and disbelief as I saw myself, knew what I was for the first time. I cried even harder knowing I was now nothing more than a collection of skin and bone melted into a mass of body parts still gently smoking. All of it was barely held together by my refusal pass on. "You're lying," I bawled, "you have to be. It's been 2 months since we've met. You called for help so I came to show you that you are nothing more than a sleepy little ghost who dreams of a past that has long since gone," said Trixie, putting her hand on my shoulder. "You didn't want to accept what I had to say, kept disappearing whenever I tried to help you. Why did I keep showing up in Tabitha's old house then?" I asked, getting up. "That was your house, Karen. Admittedly you both had the same style and layout of home, but it was yours. As you can see, the world has moved since your death, leaving you here alone, forgotten in a neighborhood that nobody cares to go to anymore," said Trixie, helping me up to my feet. "Come on, let me show you where you rest now." I had the sensation of traveling very far in a very short amount of time. When the world settled around me, I saw that I was in the middle of a large cemetery with Trixie, back in full girl form, standing next to me. Off a little ways past the graveyard I saw an imposing building of sterile concrete walls and metal bars. It felt evil and aware, a place for hiding dark and terrible secrets that the world was trying its best to ignore. This is Ash Lawn Cemetery. It's a nice quiet spot for those who have passed. Nobody bothers it much. "What's that?" I said, pointing over at the building. "This is called Smith's Grove. A hospital of sorts," she said, walking me forward a short distance to a stone marker looking identical to the thousands of others scattered around. "This is your final resting place. Everything you are, everything you wanted, everything you dreamed was for nothing. You had a future that was taken away from you by forces beyond your control. Doesn't seem fair, does it?" she said evenly, her face emotionless. "It isn't," I said bitterly. "I was going to marry Jordan and so much more." I bit my lip, knowing full well what she was talking about. I could feel a ball of anger starting to grow from the depths inside of me, growing outwards toward Trixie. She was right, it wasn't fair at all. Totally unfair. The people who loved you forgot all about you. Your parents and siblings moved on, your friends moved on. Everyone has moved on, leaving you to become a feast for the worms 6 feet under as they laugh and live life to the fullest," Trixie said, spitting out the words. "You were born a nothing and you died a nothing." "No," I screamed, overwhelmed by rage and sadness from her hurtful words. "My family loved me. Tabitha loved me. You're full of shit, Trixie." "Oh, they mourned," replied Trixie, raising her hands defensively yet not moving an inch back. "Believe me, they mourned. But it's been almost 30 years since you've passed. Like I said before, they moved on and your life was meaningless. But it doesn't have to be so. This isn't right. Why? I sobbed. "I want Tabitha back." "Really?" said Trixie as she raised my chin up. "Well, there are 2 ways to go about that." "What do you mean?" I asked, and pushed back the tears as best as I could. "Well, you could wait and go through that beautiful opening at the end of the long dark hallway and hope that Tabitha is a good enough person to join you there. Or," Trixie smirked and a small gleam grew in her eyes, "or I could introduce you to someone I know that can help you and guarantee that you'll be together again. Friendship is a form of magic, you know, and while it will take some doing and we'll have to put you through the proper training and all." "Fine. I'll do it. There is a price, of course." "I don't care, I'll pay it," I shouted. The moment I said what I said, though, I could feel whatever it was inside the building laughing at me. There was pain. I remember the pain more than anything else. Over time, though, things began to take shape, and in time I had a new home and a new identity. I even made some new friends. My new friends call this place Equestria, and it is dark and cold as well. What it is doesn't bother me now. Especially since Trixie showed me how I could make things right. I can't remember anymore what I was before meeting the man Trixie introduced to me to. He changed me, remade me, showed me the error of my ways, and for that I am grateful. And all it took was a yes. He told me he had to make me into something different, something beautiful for the doors to work. Honestly, I didn't understand what he said, but he promised me I would see Tabitha again when it was over. I just knew she would be as excited as I was and that she would love my new silver coat and mane. I even asked for a set of glasses just so she might remember who I was exactly. I loved my new look. There was only one problem: the hunger. From the very depths of me, it is always there gnawing away at me. It forced me to hunt. Even after what happened in some big Russian city, a feast for the ages, it still wasn't enough. But I waited by the doorways and in the shadows for just the right time, like all the rest. Our only goal was to stuff ourselves full of those who have pointlessly squandered their own existences. How selfish they were to not love their lives until the moment of death. One day Trixie led me to what she called a very special door. It was a door just for me, and one that I wasn't to share with anybody else. I nodded and thanked her for being so nice to me and began to watch. After a moment I saw two kids sitting with some adults mesmerized by our TV show. They sat quietly with their eyes blank, mouths open, like cows dully waiting for the slaughter to commence. I drooled at the feast that awaited me as I bided my time, however patient, something that I'd forgotten. The hunger began to rise in me as I watched each succulent portion breathe and munch on their snacks. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I pounced and forced my way into their world. I was quick and never gave them the chance to scream, and silenced them as they stared at the now blank screen. It was a feast of feasts. I stuffed bits of them into my maw and dug through their corpses in search of the tenderest pieces first before I sucked the marrow from their bones. It wasn't until I heard the scream from the kitchen that I realized that someone was missing from this group. I turned my head and saw a middle-aged woman who looked vaguely familiar. She was pretty, as far as humans went. Her hair was slightly grayed and in a long braid. Her skin was the most beautiful almond color. My jaw dropped, and with it bits of the boy who I had begun to eat fell to the floor. My eyes teared up as I gazed at the woman. I could feel a smile slowly cross my face as I stared at the woman who was the girl I once knew. "Tabitha!" I cried with joy and bounded toward her. Tabitha continued to scream in horror and began to run for the back door. I quickly cut her off and she backed away from me before tripping over her own feet. When she hit the floor, she begged and cried and eventually curled up in a ball, thoroughly terrified of me. After all these years, I thought she would be happy to see the new me. I was hurt down to the core when all she did was collapse and start to cry. There were so many things I wanted to tell her, so many games I wanted to play. We could have watched movies and talked about who we wanted to marry now that she was single again, but no, she had to ruin it. I cuffed her across the head with my hoof and sighed sadly over my friend. "How could you?" I sighed over her. "Time is a tricky thing," said a voice behind me. "Trixie," I muttered. She was terrified of me. After all this time. Well, you were eating her son. What did you expect? That she'd be okay with that? I don't know. I just thought. Trixie patted me on the head and knelt down next to us. "Do you think that maybe somewhere inside she might feel a little sad that she upset you?" My ears perked up when she said that, and I nodded quickly. Tabitha was always good at never holding a grudge. "Okay. And what did Princess Twilight said we should do if our friends hurt our feelings but feel sad that they hurt us? That we forgive them." "Girl," said Trixie as she ruffled my mane, "now, I can, with a little effort, make it so that you can have your friend back. She will probably look a little different. She might be a little grumpier at times, but it'll be her." "Really?" I said as my eyes widened with joy. "You really mean it?" "On one condition, I get the ones in the living room and you eat her. Are we agreed?" I nodded quickly and Trixie smirked and went back to the bodies in the living room. "Do be quick about that one though. She has a loud voice and someone is sure to hear if you wait too long." I gazed down at Tabitha and caressed her forehead with my hoof. "I forgive you, Tabitha," I said as I leaned over her, "for forgetting about me and screaming and all." I looked down at her. A small puddle of drool has formed next to me. I smiled at her. My long sharp teeth glistened in the midday sun. I leaned over her and opened my mouth as wide as I could. When I did, a new thought occurred to me. What if this wasn't something she wanted? What if everything I'd done up until this point was a mistake? I sighed and pushed those thoughts back down deep within me. I took my first bite and she was as sweet in flavor as she had been in personality when I knew her all those years ago. Sure, we might have some things to discuss and work through. But true best friends can do that. They can work through anything.